Good evening. Will the members and our guests please take their seats? This meeting will now come to order. As all members have received a copy of the call for tonight's meeting, the reading of the call will be omitted. Will everyone please rise and join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome to the January meeting of the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting. My name is Tom Byrne, RTM moderator. As all members have received a copy of the minutes of our December 11 meeting, the reading of the minutes will be omitted. Are there any changes to those minutes? Bill Clark, District 7.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, on page 4 of the call, last line, water courses is one word. I hope I don't have to do this one again. Thank you.
All right, we will make that change. Joan Caldwell, District 10.
Attendance for District 10 says that Gregory Rohr was present. He had resigned and was not present.
Well, it says he was absent. So I guess he wasn't here. Any additional changes to the proposed minutes? Hearing none and absent objection, the minutes as amended by Mr. Clark stand adopted upon unanimous consent. Bob Larden of District 11.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you are part of the dialogue about the Broadwater liquid natural gas terminal that is being proposed by Shell Oil to be sitting in the middle of the Long Island Sound, approximately 9 miles south of West Hartford and 10 miles north of Wading River on Long Island. And I'd like to thank the district chairs who over the weekend, given this holiday weekend, forwarded the email attachment in terms of some of the information from the Connecticut Fund of the Environment and from the Save the Sound Foundation. Joan Caldwell has been very, very kind tonight to pass around to you a 2-page overview of what this issue is about, which I'll just briefly take a few moments of your time. So that's what Joan is passing out, as well as for each of your district chairs, we have a color copy of the size of this situation. And if I might just ask you, who is familiar, if I could just see a very quick show of hands, about the Broadwater liquid natural gas proposal? Okay, that's great, quite a few of you. What you may not be aware of is tonight is the last public hearing in the state of Connecticut to speak out about this, and unfortunately it coincides with the RTM. It's actually in Brantford, and it's starting now. I spoke to the Director of Legislative Affairs for the Save the Sound, and they're up there in front of the Federal Energy and Regulatory Commission, otherwise known by the acronym as FERC, and so that still, though, doesn't leave you out. There is a very brief, and I emphasize brief, timetable that for us and you individually to share your opposition with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission by January 23rd. It must be in D.C. So any letters that you choose to write in opposition to this proposal must go out in the next few days in order to get to D.C. to be on record stating your concerns. And one of the things that we'd like you to do, is, especially for those of you that enjoy the sound and the seashore and boating, is to share on a personal, anecdotal basis what it would mean to you to have a facility, and let me just sort of dimensionalize it for you. 1,215 feet long, 200 feet wide, that pivots on its axis, so that's now about a half a mile in diameter, that would be surrounded by a 3-mile safety zone that would be, and you'll notice your district chairs will pass out this little thing, that on its average is 148 feet tall, or 14 stories, and that's above the waterline, and at its highest point has a flare tower that is 282 feet tall, and it's 200 feet wide. Imagine this. You all know how we all felt up on Round Hill Road around the fire station when the cell tower was proposed at somewhere near the height of 170 feet. This is 282 feet, or 28 stories. Think of the town hall as a rather large building that we're all familiar with. Take the town hall, multiply its height by about 3.5, make its width 1,200 feet or 4 football fields wide, and go back 200 feet in depth, and just imagine the size of this thing floating around in the Sound. It is a huge issue. It has environmental concerns that are enumerated in the overview letter. It has highly restrictive issues in terms of your boating, fishing, lobstering enjoyment. It presents additional safety issues as it relates to congestion in the Sound because large tankers, estimated at 3 per week of several thousand feet in length, are estimated to be coming in that will also fly flags other than the U.S. flag, which means that the states have no authority over those tankers, raising additional concerns. So there are a number of issues, both in terms of our restricted use, in terms of the environment, in terms of safety issues, as well as, if this is allowed to go through, it sets a very, very poor precedent that we might have to live with in terms of taking a nationally recognized estuary and handing a portion of it over to a private enterprise. And that certainly should concern all of us, even though, admittedly, it's about 20 miles up the Sound from us, but it still affects all of us. The cities up and down the coast and towns have all signed on for this, including New Haven, Norwalk, Stamford, Hartford, Bridgeport, Darien, Essex, Fairfield, Madison, Saybrook, Weston, Westport, and about 30 others. Denise Savingo and I have been communicating on this as of last week. The Conservation Committee is certainly on board, but it's now time for all of us as representatives of the town to really rally our troops and also to get our own town to take a formal position against this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lardon. Peter Berg of District 8.
Good evening, everyone, fellow members, and those watching on Channel 79. Each year, the League of Women Voters holds a legislative breakfast. This breakfast is an opportunity for you to meet your state senator and your state representatives, to ask them questions and to hear their answers on topics such as Broadwater floating gas terminal in Long Island Sound, or traffic congestion on I-95, or plans for improving service on Metro North. This breakfast is open to the public. The breakfast is this Thursday, January 18, starting at 8 a.m. The League of Women Voters sponsors this legislative breakfast every year and always at the Nathaniel Witherell Nursing Home, which is at 70 Parsonage Road. You'll get a terrific breakfast for $10 and learn about state legislation that affects you and your neighbors. You don't need a reservation, but if you want to attend, please let me know this evening or call my house, that's 661-3830, so we know how much bacon to cook. That number again, 661-3830. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Berg. I would like to encourage this body to consider putting a group together to celebrate the 75th anniversary of this rich tradition that we call the Greenwich Representative Town Meeting. We will celebrate our 75th anniversary in October of 2008. That's a significant milestone, and I think it merits an organized look into how we might celebrate that milestone. So if anyone is interested in working in such a group to make plans for that celebration, please contact me. That now brings us to the call for tonight's meeting. As I hope all are aware, item number 3 has been withdrawn because of the suggested amendments and the recognition that amending legislation on the floor at the full RTM meeting is not the best way to draft legislation. So that will go back for further work and come back to us in the future. So we have 3 items of business before us, which we will consider separately and we will take up in order. So item number 1 now comes before us. Dr. Susan Wallerstein with that resolution.
Thanks, Mr. Moderator, members of the RTM. This is a substitute resolution that has been submitted that was informed by feedback from the committees that reviewed the resolution. Resolved that the sum of $465,850 be and is hereby appropriated to be added to account Z680-595-60-27098, Architectural and Engineering Services. Said appropriation to be applied to architectural and engineering work required to develop bid specification for 1, mechanical upgrades to the heating system, boiler, and piping at Julian Curtis School, the generator at Central Middle School, and the AC at Coscob School, and new electronic heat and AC controls at Greenwich High School. 2, roofing repairs at North Street, Greenwich High, Old Greenwich, and North Mianus schools, and at the observatory. And 3, improvements at Greenwich High School to A, the drainage, lighting, and paving of the parking lot, and B, the structural integrity and surfacing of 2 footbridges. Said appropriation to come from the capital and non-recurring fund.
Will a member please move the adoption of this substitute resolution? The substitute resolution on item 1 has been moved and seconded. Is everyone familiar with the language of the substitute? Okay, is there any need to reread it? All right, I will reread it. Now before us is this resolution. Let me summarize it first, and if we need to read the exact language, I will do that. The appropriation is the same dollar amount. We had a problem with the original language of the resolution on your call because it appeared to contain a condition, which we cannot attach to appropriations. So this spells out that the appropriation will be applied to architectural and engineering work required to develop bid specification for specified projects, those being mechanical upgrades to heating system at Julian Curtis, the generator at Central Middle School, and the air conditioning at Coscob School, and new electronic heat and AC controls at Greenwich High School. The second category of work is roofing repairs at North Street, Greenwich High School, Old Greenwich, and North Mianus schools, and the observatory. Third category of work is improvements at Greenwich High School to the drainage, lighting, and paving of the parking lot, and the structural integrity and surfacing of 2 footbridges. Are we clear on what is before us? Okay, let's hear the reports of the committees that consider this. Bob Brady, Chair of our Education Committee.
Good evening, Mr. Moderator, members, and guests. The Education Committee met a week ago last Monday night, to consider this item. We were assisted by Anthony Burns and Dr. Wallerstein from the Board of Ed staff, and by Colleen Giambo and Susan Ellis from the Board of Education Board. The resolution as was proposed had 2 parts to it, in our view. The first part was, or 2 problems. The first problem was presented by the condition. The second, and the more substantive one, is the problem presented by making an interim appropriation for work to be done on projects which have yet to be reviewed by the RTM. In preparation for the work, what we did, we divided our review into 2 pieces. We first we took the projects themselves and went through them with, mainly with Tony Byrne, who is the Board of Ed's plant engineer, to understand the projects, why they were being proposed, and then consider whether we would recommend the appropriation. The projects, except for the COSCOB air conditioning, the roof on the observatory at New Leb, and the bridges at the high school, were all part of the mechanical review and audit performed for the Board of Education. They are in the CIP, in this year's CIP that we adopted last May for fiscal '08. Those projects were not reviewed in substance last year, of course, because we look only at the first year. But they have been under consideration for some time. The three new projects basically came out of work that was being done this year. The roof leaks on the observatory, the air conditioning work at COSCOB was necessary, and the bridges at the high school are defective and need work. These are all projects that fall under the general heading of health and safety concerns. The committee voted 12-0-0 to recommend the interim appropriation of this amount. We felt it was worthwhile, and that, in fact, the Board of Ed was operating in a very appropriate managerial position by bringing the engineering and architectural work ahead and performing it this spring. They would be able to do the actual work in the summer of '07 when the schools are closed, rather than waiting for us to approve the money in May, which time they do the planning over the early part of fiscal '08 and not get to do this actual work until the summer of 2008. This basically gets the work done a year earlier, assuming we like the underlying projects, which we did. So on the money side, we recommended on a vote that be appropriated. The second part of the problem had to do with the contingency. There was a series of emails going back and forth, but one of them, Mr. Fox, the town attorney, basically said the resolution was not in legal order. What the Education Committee did was to recommend removing the contingency language so that in the original resolution we just put a period at the end of the sentence where it said architectural engineering services, period. And that is the way the substitute resolution reads. The contingency has been removed. We were also aware, we'd been informed that the Land Use Committee was going to recommend an amendment to basically identify the projects in the resolution. We did not have the final language at that time. The committee discussed it, however, and said as long as, if all that's being done is to add language like that into the resolution, the committee was generally in favor of it and certainly would not object. So our vote on to amend the original resolution by taking out the contingency language was 12-0-0 to amend it, and then on the amended resolution 12-0-0. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Laura Erickson, Vice Chair of our Finance Committee.
Good evening. The Finance Committee took up item 1 last Monday night. We had Dr. Wallerstein and Mr. Byrne helping us with this item, and Mrs. Giambo from the Board of Ed was also there. The Finance Committee agreed with the essence of the resolution, which is essentially to get a jump start on the A&E for school projects that really need to be completed during the short summer months when school is not in session. The resolution seeks a 5% advance funding, if you will, from appropriations currently contemplated in the '07-08 capital budget. These projects were high-priority health and safety-related projects. The Finance Committee was informed that there were 4 new capital projects that were not contemplated in last year's plan. The AC at COSCOB School, repairs to the observatory roof, the footbridge project, and also the generator at Central Middle School. Of special note for us was really the realization that the projects included in the out years of the capital plan do not include any of the A&E costs or any contingency. which can mean up to 20% above the actual construction costs, which are included in the capital plan. This is just something we noted to ourselves and something that we were going to look at as we evaluate the capital plan in the coming weeks. The Finance Committee was advised before voting that the Education Committee had recommended removing the subject to language, and we voted with the deletion of that language, 1100, District 1 absent. At the time of our vote, we were not aware of the land use recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bloomer, Chair of our Land Use Committee.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of town meeting, item 1 was not referred to the Land Use Committee, but we considered it at our meeting on January 8th for the limited purpose of considering the language of the resolution. We did not discuss the projects proposed to be funded, and we did not have anyone from the Board of Education there to discuss the projects with us or to discuss the form of the resolution with us either. The problem with the resolution as it appeared in the call is that it appropriates a sum of money without identifying the projects for which the appropriation is being made, simply referring to approval of the projects by the CIP. The projects, however, were described in the explanos. We didn't understand what it meant for a project to be approved by the CIP because the CIP is a process, not a body. We recommended that the Board of Estimate and Taxation be substituted for CIP, but as we've heard this evening, the town attorney has subsequently ruled that the RTM could not approve the resolution with the condition attached to the appropriation, and so our proposal there was rendered moot by the deletion of that language. We did, however, address the matter of including within the resolution language that would identify the projects. And the proposed language that is in the substitute resolution is substantially the language that we recommended and approved at our meeting. The substitute resolution accordingly met the concerns, the two concerns that we identified. We voted only on the proposed amendments that we wished to make. Our vote was 10 in favor, none opposed, with 1 abstention. District 1 was absent. We did not vote on the merits of the resolution. Because the substitute resolution meets our concerns, we have no amendments to offer here this evening. The abstention was from the delegate from District 3 who felt that item 1 was not properly before the Land Use Committee.
Thank you. All right, before I open this up for discussion, I was just handed a note saying that light was still on. This is a Lexus in the back lot, license plate 582KXD. So that interior light is still on. Discussion on item 1. Dr. Carlson, District 1.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members of the RTM, I should like to ask a question of the town attorney, who may or may not be here.
Well, his office is represented.
To the representative of the town attorney's office, I should like to ask if, with these amendments, is this now in legal order?
Valerie Mays Keeney.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Town Attorney, John Wayne Fox, will be here momentarily. He was delayed at another meeting. However, I have spoken to him about this resolution in detail, and indeed, we do find that this substituted resolution is in legal order.
Thank you. Further discussion on item 1?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, I'm not quite finished on this.
Dr. Carlson?
Fellow members of the RTM, I have some doubts about having a farrago of appropriations put together in a single item like this. I have some doubts about architectural and engineering services for roofing repairs and for footbridges. For items like that, I think you just go ahead and get somebody to do them. I don't think there is any particular need for architectural and engineering studies for roofing. If you put roofing on your house or your building, you just get a roofer to come in and do it, don't you? What is the expense for? I have doubts of the proposal as it is here. And I would much rather have this proposal come back to us in perhaps a number item form in March. And since some of these items seem to be very small, that I don't think the subsequent passing of time would have much influence on them. Therefore, I would like to postpone taking up this matter till the March meeting.
So you are moving to postpone item 1 to our March meeting?
Yes, sir.
There being no second. Further discussion on item 1.
Is there a second?
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded to postpone item 1 to our March meeting. Discussion on the motion to postpone. Well, I think you've already had your discussion. Further discussion on the motion to postpone. Mr. Bloomer, District 5.
Since the language that Mr. Carlson is focusing on is part of the language that came out of the Land Use Committee, I'd simply like to point out that what the architectural and engineering work is what is required to develop bid specifications. Let me just read it. Set appropriation to be applied to architectural and engineering work required to develop bid specification. As you may recall, the point of all of this is to get these bids out at an early time, get the bid specification out so the bids can come back at an early time so the work can be accomplished during the summer months. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on Dr. Carlson's motion to postpone. Since this is a procedural matter, I will call for a voice vote. If you are in favor of putting this off until our March meeting, you should vote in favor of this motion. If you want to take it up tonight, you should vote no. All those in favor of the motion to postpone item 1 to our March meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. That motion has failed. Further discussion on item 1. Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 1, and proceed to poll your delegation. While we are voting, we will continue with the business of the meeting. Item number 2 now comes before us. Peter Crumbine, our selectman.
Good evening. Item 2 is to consider and act upon the following resolution requested by the First Selectman, approved by the Board of Selectmen. Resolved that Section 57.1 of the Charter of the Town of Greenwich be amended as follows. And Section 57.1 is involved with the makeup of the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee, and the rest is as written in your call.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 2 has been moved and seconded. Bob Richardson, Chair of our Special Committee on the Nathaniel Witherell.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, the Special Committee considered item 2 at our regular meeting on Thursday evening, January 4th. Among our guests were Witherell directors David Ayers and Paul Torretta, as well as Bill Kowaleski, the Executive Director, and Ray Augustine, Director of Financial Operations. Our Town Attorney, Wayne Fox, and Assistant Town Counsel, Valerie Mays, were also present and commented on the item. David Ormsby, Chairman of Nathaniel Witherell's Board, was unable to attend our meeting but had sent a detailed email explaining the proposed changes to Section 57 of the Town Charter, which defines the initiation, composition, appointment, and function of a building committee, which is required whenever modifications of a significant order are to be made to Nathaniel Witherell's buildings. Mr. Ormsby's comments were adopted as his own by Bill Kowalewski in addressing the proposal, which seeks to make three major changes to Section 57.1. The first major change is in paragraph B, in which the board proposes to increase the size of the building committee by increasing the potential number of voting members from a range of 7 to 9 to a range of 8 to 10. Within that range, the number of voting members to be appointed by the Nathaniel Witherell Board itself would be increased from 1 to 2. It is also proposed to increase the number of ex officio non-voting members from 6 to 8 by adding an appointee of the Nathaniel Witherell Board and Nathaniel Witherell's executive director. The second major change is in paragraph D, in which it is proposed that the Nathaniel Witherell Board replace the Board of Health as the town agency which determines when changes are to be made to Witherell's physical plant. Also, the Witherell Board, rather than the Board of Health, will determine the project specifications and requirements and request that the Board of Selectmen appoint a building committee. Similar conforming changes are proposed in paragraph G, where the Nathaniel Witherell Board, rather than the Board of Health, will become the agency authorized to approve the selection and employment of an architect, as well as approve the final plans and specifications, and to submit any applications for aid. The third major change is also in paragraph D, and it consists of the deletion of the requirement to have in hand a certificate of need approved by the state before the appointment of a building committee can be requested. This is a very important change in the town approval process, allowing the building committee to get all the necessary town approvals for any project before obtaining a certificate of need from the Connecticut Department of Social Services for the project. You are aware, of course, that absent a state certificate of need, a project cannot be implemented regardless of what town authorizations have been given. It should also be noted that in paragraph H, there are some minor reporting improvements. In the committee's discussion, Mr. Fox opined for the benefit of the committee that the proposed amendments are in legal order and that approval by a majority of the entire RTM is required for enactment without submission to a referendum by the voters. The committee generally welcomes the proposed amendments, particularly the modification to the approval process, which under extant provisions of Section 57.1 was simply out of whack with DSS regulations and required DSS granting an exception when the proposed $45 million building plan was previously submitted. At that time, there was a lot of consternation in town government that almost all the significant land use approvals had been obtained without the formation of a building committee, effectively getting the cart before the horse. That should not happen in the future if the proposed changes are adopted tonight. Mr. Brady of District 5 raised the question whether the Witherell Board, when appointing 2 members of the building committee, would have to appoint one from each major political party. He pointed out that the provision allowing the Nathaniel Witherell Board to appoint 2 voting members would be a first in terms of town building committee practice, which admittedly is largely related to school building committees. Mr. Fox undertook to find out the answer to Mr. Brady's questions. Perhaps Ms. Mays can answer that question in due course. There were no objections to the proposal during our discussion, and the committee voted to recommend that you adopt the proposed changes. Our vote was 7 in favor, none opposed, none abstaining, and 4 absent. Within the last 2 days, I received a message from Mr. Kavee, Chairman of the Public Works Committee, advising that he intends to offer an amendment this evening to proposed paragraph B. By email, I have made the members of the special committee aware of Mr. Kavee's amendments, but we have not had an opportunity to discuss it. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That concludes our report.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. Doug Wells, Chair of our Legislative and Rules Committee.
Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, our committee took this matter up last Monday evening. Appearing on behalf of the Law Department was Wayne Fox, as well as Valerie Mays-Keeney. Appearing on behalf of Nathaniel Witherell was its board chairman, David Ormsby. I'm not going to go into our discussions because Mr. Richardson has done an excellent job of reviewing the entire resolution for you. Just want to point out that this is a charter change. As Mr. Richardson did indicate, it will require a majority of the entire membership as opposed to a majority of those people voting tonight. We heard from the Law Department. Ms. Keeney provided the legal opinion that this charter change is in legal order and it does not require a voter referendum. She explained that Section 66 of the Charter requires a voter referendum only when the powers of the BET, the RTM, or the Board of Selectmen is implicated. She did point out, however, that Section 174 of our Charter does provide for a procedure to put this item on a voter referendum by way of a petition. Our committee took 2 votes on this matter. The first as to legal order. That was 10 in favor, none opposed, with 2 abstentions. Those 2 abstentions were from Districts 2 and 7, and the abstentions were the continuing concern about whether or not charter changes should be done in the manner that it was in light of the 1975 referendum. We also took a vote on the merits of the resolution. Our vote was 12 in favor, none opposed, no abstentions.
Thank you. Jerry Isaacson, Chair of our Health and Human Services Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Health and Human Services took this matter up. We had David Ormsby, Chairman of the Board of Witherell, Bill Kowaleski, Executive Director, and Ms. Keeney of the Law Department with us to help us understand it. I won't reiterate what Bob Richardson has very eloquently covered for you as to the details and the need. But we in the Health and Human Services Committee certainly agreed with these changes, particularly the the greater representation on the Building Committee for Nathaniel Witherell, and especially to the timing of the Certificate of Need versus the Building Committee. After short discussion, our vote was 9-1-1 with District 11 absent. The abstention was because the District 3 delegate arrived after most of the discussion. The no vote from District 8 was related to the dispute about the process for making changes to the Charter and not to the content of this particular item.
Thank you, Mr. Isaacson. Robert Kavee, Chair of our Public Works Committee.
The Public Works Committee met on Monday, January 8th, to consider this item. Item 2 on the call was the only item for consideration. Our guest, Bill Kowaleski, Director of the Nathaniel Witherell, represented the sponsors of the item. I want to skip most of this because, all right. Primarily, the changes are offered to address the need to extract the duties from the Board of Health to the Nathaniel Witherell Board and to diversify the committee to account for the broad and complicated nature of any future Witherell project. As part of the general discussion, a clarification of fact and amendment to the language was forwarded by the Chair. In item B, there is a bracketed phrase on top of page 2 of the call. There's a bracketed phrase, the chairman of the representative town meeting building committee to be deleted, and the moderator of the representative town meeting to be added to the charter. Well, the building committee of the RTM doesn't exist. At the time it was dissolved, all duties of the building committee were assigned to the Public Works Committee. The then chairman, who was my predecessor of the building committee, declined to accept the duties of appointments. So that's why this language appeared. But in speaking with the moderator, I believe he believes that this is a committee this is a task best performed in a RTM committee, and there doesn't seem to be any reason to assign it to the moderator. When the building committee was dissolved, several other committees of the RTM changed their names. They would also be inconsistent with the charter. The same issue applies to school building committees, which was maybe not a charter change, but I can't think of the document that referred to the building committee as the appointee to this day. So the amendment proposed is to restore the original language by deleting the brackets, that's step one, and by deleting the bold-faced addition, moderator of the representative town meeting, and then by deleting the word building and replacing it by Public Works Committee. So the item 8 would then read, 1, by the chairman of the representative town meeting Public Works Committee. And I guess continuing on as it did, to be drawn from the body of the RTM. This modification was approved unanimously by the Public Works Committee, and the item as a whole was approved 12-0-0 as amended by the Public Works Committee.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kavee. So at this point, since we have no further committee reports, I'm sorry, Mr. Wells?
Mr. Moderator, I did neglect to say that our committee had made one grammatical change. On page 3 of the call, the 6th line down, the line that begins with transaction of business, the second part of that phrase, it says, but a less number may adjourn. We changed it from less to lesser to make it grammatically correct.
All right. Is there, so your committee is offering a motion to amend?
That was part of our committee's, we passed it as revised with that grammatical change.
All right. So let's take that amendment up first. We can adopt amendments upon unanimous consent. Is everyone aware of this proposed change, changing the word less to lesser? Is there any objection to that amendment offered on behalf of our Legislative and Rules Committee? Hearing none, that motion to amend is adopted upon unanimous consent. Mr. Kavee, Mr. Ormsby, our procedure is to take care of any motions offered by the committees that reviewed, and then we would get into debate, and you certainly are free to debate, but we'll get the motion to amend offered on behalf of our Public Works Committee before us, and then we'll proceed from there. Mr. Kavee?
Yes, the motion is to replace the 1 by the bracketed chairman of the Representative Town Meeting Building Committee, end bracket, boldface, moderator of the Representative Town Meeting, by 1 by the chairman of the Representative Town Meeting Public Works Committee, etc., without the moderator of the town meeting added.
All right, so this is to amend what is before us to put back the power to appoint an ex officio member with the chairman of one of our committees, in this case it being the Public Works Committee.
Right, and I believe this received tentative approval from the Witherall Board and from several other committee chairs.
Okay. That being offered on behalf of one of our committees, it does not require a second. Discussion on the Public Works Committee proposed amendment. Is there any objection to that proposed amendment? Hearing none and absent objection, that motion to amend is adopted upon unanimous consent. I do have the vote on item number 1, which was the appropriation for the schools. Those in favor, 171. Opposed, 7. Abstaining, 2. That item has carried. All right, discussion on item 2. David Ormsby, Chair of the Nathaniel Witherell Board. This is where you may want to heed the warning not to grasp defeat from the jaws of victory, but...
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen of the RTM and invited guests, I thought Bob Richardson's summary of the proposed amendment was right on, and I think that I couldn't improve upon that. I also, on behalf of the Nathaniel Witherell Board, agree with the amendments offered by Mr. Wells and Mr. Cavee and just approved by the RTM. But I'd simply like to say that it's important to understand what is not being approved by this charter amendment. Your approval of this charter amendment does not constitute approval of any construction, rehabilitation, or alteration of Nathaniel Witherell. That will occur only when, as and if, the Board of Selectmen, Board of Estimate and Taxation, and the representative town meeting at future times and dates, if at all, approve such a project. We take none of those approvals for granted. Your approval of this proposed charter amendment does not obligate the town to proceed with any financial support for the renewal of Nathaniel Witherell, nor does it automatically create a town building committee. And as you reach your decision on the proposed charter amendment, I would simply ask that you keep in mind the very narrow scope of what we're asking you to endorse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Further discussion on item 2. Jim Boutel, District 8.
Mr. Moderator, fellow members, this goes by the nature of a question. Mr. Richardson, in giving his report for the special committee, raised the question about minority party representation as it constitutes this board, and said we may get an answer later. I'm hoping we do get that answer this evening, because this is a body that is, if you read the process and how the nominations are made, it's staggered. By that I mean the Nathaniel Witherell Board and the BET and the Board of Health make their appointments first. That is then followed by the, and this is where my question is going to come in, selectmen making the appointments for the remaining members. So the selectmen's appointments will be restricted by what the prior bodies have appointed.
Well, can I just stop you there, because it's appointment by the RTM on nomination of the selectmen.
Well, then the nominations of the selectmen will be restricted based upon what the prior bodies have done. My question, though, is, and unfortunately I don't have my copy with the charter tonight, this may be a moot question based on definitions in the front of the charter, but on page 2 of the call, you will see the last line of D and the second line of E both reference the first selectman. Throughout the remainder of this section, it simply references the selectmen, i.e. the size of this board will be determined by the selectmen. And my question is that the first selectman or is that the Board of Selectmen? And I think, if possible, if it is indeed the Board of Selectmen or the first selectman, we should substitute in each area where it says selectmen to clarify in fact, what selectman means. Thank you.
All right, you're referring, where it says just selectmen, it is men, M-E-N, plural, correct? Correct. Okay. Ms. Keeney, do you, would you like to respond to that?
Where the reference is to the selectmen, that would be the Board of Selectmen. Where the language is specifically the first selectman, then that is what is intended. With respect to the minority representation statute, overall, the building committee of the Nathaniel Witherell would be required to adhere to the requirements of the statute. The more narrow question as to whether one member from each party would have to be appointed from the Nathaniel Witherell board, the answer is no, but the committee overall would be required to adhere to the requirements of the statute. As a practical matter, the nominations by the selectmen then, which must occur under subsection D after the three boards have appointed their members of the committee, then those factors would be determined by the selectmen at that point.
Thank you. Further discussion on item 2? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 2, and proceed to poll your delegation. Item 3 has been withdrawn, so that brings us to item number 4. Peter Crumbine with that resolution.
Resolved that the following named person nominated by the Board of Selectmen be appointed as an alternate member of the Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals for a term expiring March 31st, 2010, Cyril Mossoff.
Thank you. Will a member please move the adoption of the resolution? The resolution on item 4 has been moved and seconded. Franklin Bloomer with the report of our Land Use Committee.
This is an item which would have been in our consent calendar if we had one, but it gives us an opportunity to look at take a quick look at a very well-qualified candidate. We interviewed Mr. Mossoff at our meeting on January 8th. He is a lawyer, a private practitioner based here in Greenwich. His academic background is in the Explanos. He has an undergraduate degree in chemistry. In addition to his regular law degree, he has a graduate law degree from the University of London, a master's degree, and a certificate from the Hague Academy of International Law. He is a specialist in patents and trademarks. He works primarily, if not exclusively, for other lawyers. He appears frequently before something called the Patent Board of Appeals. Our interview focused primarily on his views of when a variance should be granted. He believes that the Zoning Board of Appeals is there to bring equitable considerations to bear on the application of the zoning regulations. He feels that variances should not be granted where the variance would negatively impact the town's strategic plan for growth, but he feels that variances may be granted where it has a de minimis impact and affects only 2 or 3 adjacent property owners who do not object. On a personal note, many of you might be interested in knowing that he is the husband of Joanne Messina, who was the former president of the League of Women Voters of Greenwich and chaired the Selectmen's Parking and Traffic Committee before it was disbanded late last year. So they will have something to talk about at breakfast. He made a very favorable impression on our committee as an articulate and intelligent nominee, and we voted 11 in favor, none opposed, with no abstentions, with District 1 absent.
Thank you. Colleen Jenkins with the report of our Appointments Committee.
As Franklin Bloomer said, this should have been a consent item. The vote of the Appointments Committee is 12-0-0, and that completes, it avoids redundancy. At your convenience, could we recognize a vacancy?
Let's do that now.
Okay. There's a vacancy on the Claims Committee. We'd like to thank Brian Farrow for his years of service. He's chosen to retire. We would love to keep him, but we can't.
Well, this is,
So we have a vacancy on the Claims Committee, and since you, the moderator of the RTM, is a member of that committee, could you describe what you're looking for?
okay, the committee consists of 10 members. The moderator is the chair, and then the RTM appoints 9 of its members as the other members of that committee. It acts in place. This is unique among RTM committees in that the Claims Committee actually acts in place of the RTM. Given the sensitive nature of the types of matters that come before us, our votes appropriate money to settle claims or pay judgments against the town. So we have historically asked for those with some other legal training or insurance background or risk management background, although that's not a requirement. The committee currently has those skills, so really anyone is eligible. And if you are interested, please contact Colleen Jenkins. The nomination to the RTM is made by our Appointments Committee. So her committee will meet with any candidates and make a recommendation to the full RTM. And if you have any questions, you can contact me or other members of the committee. Thank you.
So if you could contact us within about 2 weeks, I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. So that, well, any discussion on item 4? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 4, and proceed to poll your delegation? Since that is the final item to come before us tonight, we will await the results of the vote before adjourning the meeting. I would like to thank, before we take off, I would like once again to thank Paul Curtis and Jenny Larkin, who do the work in bringing this, who are responsible for broadcasting this on Channel 79. Just a note, I'm informed that there was no live broadcast tonight, so if your family and friends were looking forward to seeing you, they'll have to wait till Wednesday. I have the results of the vote on item 2, which is the proposed charter change regarding the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee. Those in favor, 168, opposed, 11, abstaining, 4. That item is carried. We are awaiting the votes on item 4. The results of the vote on item 4, which is the appointment of Cyril Mossoff to be an alternate member of Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals. Those in favor, 179. Opposed, 1. Abstaining, 0. That item has carried. There being no further business to come before the meeting, and absent objection, the meeting is now.
Our interview focused primarily on his views of when a variance should be granted. He believes that the Zoning Board of Appeals is there to bring equitable considerations to bear on the application of the zoning regulations. He feels that variances should not be granted where the variance would negatively impact the town's strategic plan for growth, but he feels that variances may be granted where it has a de minimis impact and affects only 2 or 3 adjacent property owners who do not object. On a personal note, many of you might be interested in knowing that he is the husband of Joanne Messina, who was the former president of the League of Women Voters of Greenwich and chaired the Selectmen's Parking and Traffic Committee before it was disbanded late last year. So they will have something to talk about at breakfast. He made a very favorable impression on our committee as an articulate and intelligent nominee, and we voted 11 in favor, none opposed, with no abstentions, with District 1 absent.
Thank you. Colleen Jenkins with the report of our Appointments Committee.
As Franklin Bloomer said, this should have been a consent item. The vote of the Appointments Committee is 12-0-0, and that completes, it avoids redundancy. At your convenience, could we recognize the vacancy?
Let's do that now.
Okay. There's a vacancy on the Claims Committee. We'd like to thank Brian Farrow for his years of service. He's chosen to retire. We would love to keep him, but we can't.
Well, this is...
So we have a vacancy on the Claims Committee. And since you, the moderator of the RTM, is a member of that committee, could you describe what you're looking for?
Okay. The committee consists of 10 members. The moderator is the chair, and then the RTM appoints 9 of its members as the other members of that committee. It acts in place. This is unique among RTM committees in that the Claims Committee actually acts in place of the RTM. Given the sensitive nature of the types of matters that come before us, our votes appropriate money to settle claims or pay judgments against the town. So we have historically asked for those with some other legal training or insurance background or risk management background, although that's not a requirement. The committee currently has those skills, so really anyone is eligible. And if you are interested, please contact Colleen Jenkins. The nomination to the RTM is made by our Appointments Committee. So her committee will meet with any candidates and make a recommendation to the full RTM. And if you have any questions, you can contact me or other members of the committee. Thank you.
So if you could contact us within about 2 weeks, I'd appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right. So that, well, any discussion on item 4? Will the district chairs please mark your voting cards, item number 4, and proceed to poll your delegation? Since that is the final item to come before us tonight, we will await the results of the vote before adjourning the meeting. I have the results of the vote on item 2, which is the proposed charter change regarding the Nathaniel Witherell Building Committee. Those in favor, 168, opposed, 11, abstaining 4. That item is carried. We are awaiting the votes on item 4. The results of the vote on item 4, which is the appointment of Cyril Mossoff to be an alternate member of Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals. Those in favor, 179. Opposed, 1. Abstaining, 0. That item has carried. There being no further business to come before the meeting, and absent objection, the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all for coming, and have a safe trip home.